The knock came at 12:14 a.m. And I know that because I was awake watching the ceiling fan do nothing useful. And I checked my phone before I checked the door, which tells you everything about the kind of person I am. It's me. From upstairs. Her voice was flat in a way that scared me more than crying would have. I can't sleep alone tonight. I know that's insane. I'm going to go back upstairs in 10 seconds, whether you answer or not. I opened the door. She was already turning to leave. Her name was Mara. I knew that because the landlord, Pete, had mentioned a woman moving into 4B that morning. Said she paid 6 months up front in cash. Said it like that was a fun fact, and not a siren. She stood in my hallway in a sweatshirt with the cuffs chewed ragged, barefoot, holding her own elbows like she was keeping her ribs from sliding apart. "You don't know me," she said. "This is the part where you say no." "Come in," I said, and stepped back. And that was the first stupid thing I did. Except it wasn't stupid. Because 9 minutes later, I understood why a grown woman would rather sit on a stranger's floor than be alone in her own apartment with the lights off. She sat with her back against my door. Not the couch. The door. Like she needed to feel it locked through her spine. "Someone's looking for me," she said. "I don't think he knows this building yet. I think I have maybe a week before he does." "Who?" "If I tell you his name, you'll look him up. And if you look him up, you'll find out he's the kind of person who finds out things like that." She pressed her palms flat on the floor. "I'm not explaining this right. I just needed a door between me and the window for one night. Tomorrow I'll be normal. I promise I'm not your problem. I made tea I didn't drink." She fell asleep sitting up at 2 a.m., and I sat across from her until the sky went gray. Doing the thing you do when a stranger's fear becomes, against your better judgment, partially yours. When she woke at 6, disoriented, blinking at unfamiliar furniture, the first thing she said was, "I'm so sorry." And the second thing she said, quieter, almost to herself, was, "I forgot what it felt like to wake up." And nothing was wrong yet. She left before 7, apologizing twice more on her way out. And I stood in my own doorway for a long time after the door upstairs clicked shut, doing the math on exactly how scared a person has to be to knock on a stranger's door instead of staying with the fear alone, and not liking any of the answers I came up with. Her name was Daniel Voss, and I only learned it because 2 weeks later, a man in a gray sedan parked outside our building for 4 hours, and Mara watched him through the blinds without breathing. "He's not supposed to know I'm in this state," she said. "He works for the county. Process server. Sometimes does welfare checks. Has a badge that isn't a real badge, but looks like one, if you're not paying attention." She said this like reciting a danger she'd memorized the shape of. "He can pull my last known address through 3 different systems most people don't know are connected. He told me once, when we were still, when it was still normal, that he could find anyone who'd ever had a parking ticket. I used to think that was a flex. Now I know it was a warning. What does he want? He wants the thing he always wants, which is for me to come back so he can be the one who let me leave." She almost laughed. It died before it reached her mouth. "He filed something, a welfare petition, claiming I'm unstable and a danger to myself, which is the legal version of taking my hands off the wheel and then telling everyone I crashed the car. There's a hearing. 17 days. If a judge believes him, he gets a wellness order that lets him have officers escort him to my residence. Legally, with paperwork. That's the part nobody understands. He doesn't need to break in. He just needs a stamp. 17 days. I wrote it on my calendar like a normal appointment. Hearing, Mara, and stared at it like it might rearrange itself into something less real. Day 4. Mara's phone buzzed 3 times in a row at 9 a.m. while she was sitting at my counter, and I watched the color leave her face in real time. like someone had unplugged something behind her eyes. "My manager wants to talk to me," she said. "Today. In person." She turned the phone so I could see the email forwarded underneath the meeting request. A message sent to her work account from an address she didn't recognize, claiming to be a concerned family friend, describing her as someone going through a serious mental health crisis and potentially unsafe to be client-facing. It was polite. It was detailed. It used the word concerned 4 times. "He doesn't even know where you work," I said. "He used to drop me off." She said it like a confession. 2 years ago. He remembers everything that was ever useful to him. She went to the meeting. She came back with her job intact. Barely. A stern talk. A note in a file. A manager who believed her, but now had a sentence in writing that would sit there forever. Concerns were raised about the employee's mental health. True or not. Daniel hadn't needed to win. He'd only needed to put a sentence on paper that someone else would have to explain away for the rest of her career. "This is what I mean," she said, sitting on my floor that night, knees pulled to her chest. "He doesn't have to be right. He just has to be first. Whoever writes the first version of the story gets believed by default, and everyone after that is just trying to walk it back. Then we write a faster version." She looked up. "Of what?" "Of everything. Starting now." Day 5. We sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and built the thing that would end up mattering more than either of us understood yet. A shared document. Timestamp. Dated back as far as Mara could reconstruct from memory and old emails. Every threat, every visit, every piece of contact Daniel had made since she'd left. Organized by date instead of by how much each one had hurt. Which she said was harder than it sounded, because grief doesn't naturally sort itself into rows. "If I write it all down in order," she said, staring at the blinking cursor, "it stops being a feeling I carry and starts being a thing that happened. I don't know if I'm ready for it to be a thing that happened, instead of a feeling I get to keep blurry. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be accurate. The being ready part can come later." She typed for 2 hours. While I made dinner, neither of us ate. By the end, there were entries going back 14 months. A flat tire she now suspected wasn't flat by accident. A delivery of flowers to her new address before she told anyone the new address. A wrong number call from a blocked line the week she signed her current lease. Things that had each seemed small enough to doubt on their own and looked entirely different lined up, end to end. "I thought I was being paranoid for 2 years, she said, looking at the finished list. "Turns out I was just early." We named the document. Mara typed the title herself, then sat back and looked at it like it was the first sentence of something she actually had some control over. "Daniel Voss, pattern of contact, documented. That's the first time his name has felt like evidence instead of a threat," she said. "He came to the building on day 6, and he didn't knock on her door. He knocked on mine. 'I'm so sorry to bother you,' he said, and his voice was the kind that made you want to apologize back." Pressed shirt. A badge-shaped laminate clipped to his belt that said County Welfare Services in letters too official to be anything but designed to be glanced at, not read. "I'm doing a wellness check on a resident. Mara Holt. 4th floor? Have you seen her? We're a little concerned for her safety." "I don't know anyone by that name," I said, and felt the lie land in my chest like a stone going into water. Small splash, long sink. "If you do see her," he said, smiling exactly the amount a person smiles when they're not actually trying to look friendly, "tell her Daniel stopped by. Just Daniel. She'll know." He left a card. I held it like it might be recording me. That night, Mara sat on my floor again, except this time she wasn't shaking. She was very, very still, which I was starting to understand was worse. "He's not supposed to know this building exists," she said, "which means someone told him. Or he's already further along than 17 days. What does he actually want, Mara? The real thing, not the legal thing. She looked at me for a long time before she answered, and when she did, her voice had no performance left in it at all. He wants to be the version of himself where leaving him was impossible. If I'm crazy, then leaving doesn't count. If I'm dangerous, he was protecting the world. He's not chasing me because he loves me. He's chasing me because my being fine without him is a fact he can't survive. I started keeping a log. Times, dates, what he said, what he wore, the card, a screenshot of the welfare petition's case number that Mara found in a county portal at 1 a.m. Her hands shaking too hard to type her own password right the first 2 tries. You don't have to do this, she said, watching me write. I know. Most people don't. I'm aware that's the whole problem with most people. She almost smiled at that, the first real one I'd seen, and for half a second the hallway light made her look like someone who used to laugh easily before whatever happened to her took the easy part out. Day 9. Mara got a call from someone named Priya, an old mutual friend from the relationship years, asking, gently, carefully, clearly believing she was helping, whether Mara had thought about just talking to Daniel directly, one conversation, to clear the air before this turns into a whole legal thing. Priya didn't know about the badge. Priya didn't know about the hospital. Priya only knew that Daniel had called her sounding heartbroken and reasonable, and that Mara, from a distance, sounded like the one being difficult. Mara hung up and sat very still on my couch for a long time, phone in her lap like it had betrayed her on his behalf. This is the part nobody warns you about, she said finally. It's not just him. It's that he's likable. He's so likable that the people who love me start doing his outreach for him without even knowing they've been recruited. I could spend the rest of my life explaining myself to friends of friends he's gotten to first, and I would still lose, because explaining is exhausting and being charming isn't. You don't owe Priya an explanation. I know. But some small, stupid part of me wanted to call her back and defend myself anyway. That's the part that scares me. Not him. The part of me that still wants his friends to think well of me, even now. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. I don't want to be the kind of person who needs everyone's approval to feel safe. But I think 2 years with him made me exactly that person, and I don't know how long it takes to stop. You called me at midnight and asked for a locked door instead of his approval, I said. That's not nothing. That might be the start of the part where you stop. She didn't answer, but she didn't argue either, which from Mara was its own kind of agreement. Day 11. The gray sedan was back, parked directly outside. No pretense this time. Mara stood at my window with 2 fingers pressed to the glass, like she could push the car backward down the street through sheer will. He's not waiting for the hearing, she said. He's making sure I see him. That's the whole point. He doesn't need to do anything. He needs me to remember what it felt like when he could do anything. Day 12. An envelope appeared under Mara's door, sometime between 6 and 9 a.m. No postage, no mail slot used, which meant someone had walked it there by hand. Inside was a single page formatted to look like a notice of intent to serve. Official header, case number, a paragraph of language dense enough to seem authoritative to anyone who hadn't spent the last 2 weeks learning exactly how authoritative language gets faked. She brought it down to me, still holding it by the very corner, like it might be contagious. He had this delivered, she said, personally, which means he was in this building again, this morning, close enough to slide paper under my door, and nobody saw him do it. I turned the page over in the light. The county seal in the corner was slightly off, the wrong shade of blue, the eagle's wing bent at an angle the real seal never used. This isn't from the county. It's from a printer. It doesn't matter if it's real, if it scares me into acting like it is. Her hands hadn't stopped shaking since she picked it up. That's the whole design. He doesn't need a real document. He needs me to read notice of intent to serve at 7 in the morning and feel my whole life narrow back down to him. So we treat it like what it is. Evidence of exactly how far he's willing to go to manufacture fear before he's even allowed in a courtroom. I photographed both sides, logged the date and time, added it to the folder under a new heading Mara wrote herself in block letters. Forged documents, plural apparently. She almost laughed at her own handwriting. It was the first time fear and humor had occupied the same sentence since the night she knocked on my door. And I remember thinking that was its own kind of progress, smaller than a victory, but realer than nothing. That night she told me the rest of it. The part she'd been keeping folded smaller than the rest. There had been a hospital visit 2 years ago that wasn't an accident, the way the paperwork said it was an accident. There had been a period of time she didn't remember clearly. On medication he had access to, in an apartment he had a key to. There had been a moment, finally, when she understood that the only way out was a 6-hour drive at 4 a.m. with a single bag, and that even now, 2 states and 1 new name later, the drive hadn't actually ended. It had just gotten quieter. If he gets that order, she said, he gets to walk into my apartment with a county escort and decide, on paper, that I'm not a reliable narrator of my own life. And once that's on paper, it's real in a way that the truth never gets to be. Then we make sure the paper says something else. She looked at me like I'd offered her a rope over water she'd already decided to drown in. How? Receipts, I said. He's been sloppy because he didn't think anyone was watching him be sloppy. Day 13, Pete stopped me in the lobby, holding a piece of junk mail like it might explain something. Weird question, he said. But did you know there was a county thing going around about the building? Some guy called the office yesterday, real polite, asking about a tenant on 4. I told him I couldn't give out resident info over the phone, which, between you and me, made him sound a little annoyed for a guy doing a routine wellness call. My stomach did a slow turn. Did he leave a name? Something like Voss? I wrote it down somewhere. Pete patted his pockets like the somewhere might be on his person. Should I be worried about anything? Not yet, I said, which was true in the most technical sense possible, and a complete lie in every sense that mattered. And I went straight upstairs to tell Mara that Daniel had moved from parking outside the building to calling the building directly, which meant the radius of his reach had widened by exactly 1 office and 1 board. Well-meaning landlord, who didn't yet know he was holding a loose thread that, pulled hard enough, would unravel the whole disguise. He's testing doors, Mara said. Pete's office was a door. Mine was a door. Yours was a door. He's going to keep testing until one of them opens the way he wants. Then we make sure none of them do. Day 14. Pete the landlord mentioned, in the casual way landlords mention catastrophic things, that a county officer had come by the office asking for building access records, claiming a welfare concern, and Pete, bless his oblivious heart, had actually pulled the entry log before catching himself and saying he'd need a warrant for that, sir. He has my entry log request in writing now, Mara said, when I told her. And her face had gone the particular white of someone watching a wall close. That's not nothing. That's a paper trail showing he's actively pursuing my location through a third party, which is exactly the kind of stalking behavior the actual law cares about, except I have no way to prove that's what it is, instead of a concerned ex doing a wellness check. Unless someone else already has it in writing too. I called Pete back. I asked him, carefully, on a phone call I recorded, with his permission, to confirm exactly what Daniel had said, and exactly what credentials he'd shown. Pete, it turned out, still had the business card. The laminate badge number on it didn't match any county department, because Pete's nephew worked in county records and texted back in 9 minutes flat. No employee under that ID. That's not a real badge number. It's not even close. Daniel Voss was not, and had never been, a county welfare officer. He was a process server who had bought a laminate machine. He's been impersonating a county official, I said, and watched Mara's whole body change shape, the way a held breath changes shape when it finally leaves. That's not a custody loophole, she said slowly. That's a crime. Day 15. Someone pounded on my door at 7 p.m., and for one airless second I thought it was him. Escalated. Finally physical. It was a woman I'd never met. Car keys still in her fist like she might need to throw them at something. Where's my sister? Not a question. Mara. I know she's in this building. I know you're the one she's been calling. And I need you to tell me what is actually happening, because all I have is a voicemail from a man who says she's having a breakdown and a phone that goes to voicemail every single time I call her back. Mara appeared in the hallway behind me before I could answer, and the two of them stood there for a second like a held note before the chord resolves. Cass? Mara's voice cracked on the single syllable. He called you. He called Mom. He called my work, Mara. He found my work. Cass stopped, recalibrating in real time, the anger curdling into something raw. I believed him for a day. One whole day I thought you were sick again and hiding it from us. And I am so sorry. And I am so angry. Because that is exactly the version of you he's been selling everyone for 2 years, and I almost bought it again. You didn't know. I should have called you first. Not him. Never him. Cass pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. I forgot how good he is at being believed. They sat in my kitchen until midnight, Mara walking her sister through 16 days of documentation, watching something in Cass's face rebuild itself plank by plank. Not trust in Daniel. The opposite. A controlled demolition of the last soft spot he had left to use against her. By the time Cass left, she had a copy of the folder on her phone and a promise to testify to the hearing officer about the calls if it came to that. That's one more thing he doesn't get to control, Mara said, watching her sister's taillights pull away. What my own family believes about me. Day 16. Just past noon, my laptop went missing for 11 minutes, and those were the longest 11 minutes of the entire 17 days. I'd left it on the lobby bench while I signed for a package. The folder, every log entry, every recording, every screenshot of the badge that wasn't real, sitting open in a browser tab, unlocked, because I'd stepped away for 30 seconds, and 30 seconds had never mattered before. When I turned around, it was gone. I found it 4 benches down, where a maintenance guy named Ortiz had moved it so the new guy doesn't trip on the cord, and my hands were shaking too hard to type my password right the first 2 tries. An echo of Mara typing hers 2 weeks earlier that I didn't notice until later. But for 11 minutes, I had let myself imagine the worst version, Daniel, or someone working an angle for him, walking past a bench, seeing a folder titled DV, documentation, lifting it, deleting it, and erasing 16 days of proof in the time it takes to hit one key. Nothing happened. Nothing was taken. But I called Mara from the lobby anyway, voice unsteady, and said 4 words that became our rule for the rest of that day and every day since. Everything gets backed up. Twice to 2 accounts. One of them mine. One of them Cass's. Neither of them anywhere near a public bench again. You scared me, Mara said when I told her, and there was something almost tender underneath the fear. The specific tenderness of being frightened for someone instead of someone, which she told me later she hadn't felt directed at her in 2 years. Day 16, evening. My own phone rang from a number I didn't recognize, and against every instinct I'd built up over 2 weeks of watching Mara flinch at unknown callers, I answered it. You must be the neighbor. His voice was warm the way a heat lamp is warm. Designed, not natural. Daniel, I think we've crossed paths. I just want to say, neighbor to neighbor, that I appreciate you looking out for Mara. I really do. But you should know the full picture before you decide whose side you're on. She has a history, a documented one. People who get close to her end up exhausted, end up hurt, end up wondering what happened to their own life. I'm not the villain in this. I'm the only person who stayed long enough to actually see it. I've seen the documentation too, I said. Yours, the badge that doesn't exist. The email to her employer from an address that traces back to a domain you registered 8 months ago. Should I keep going? Or do you want to tell me more about the full picture? The warmth left his voice so fast it was almost a sound. A click, a switch thrown somewhere behind his eyes. You don't understand what you're involved in. I understand exactly what I'm involved in. I'm involved in a hallway, a folder, and 17 days, 15 of which are already over. I hung up before he could answer, hands cold, heart going harder than it had any right to for a phone call, and sat very still on my kitchen floor for a long minute before I went upstairs to tell Mara that he'd found a new door to knock on, and that the door hadn't opened the way he expected. He called you, she said. And for the first time since the night she sat with her back against my door, I watched fear move through her and land somewhere new. Not for herself this time, but for me, which she apologized for instantly, and which I told her, just as instantly, she had no business apologizing for. This was never going to stay contained to my floor, I said. I opened the door. I don't get to be surprised the weather got in. Day 16. With the hearing 18 hours out, Daniel Voss came to the building one more time, and this time he didn't knock on my door. He went straight to 4B and knocked on hers, 3 times, hard. The way you knock when you've already decided the answer is yes. I stood in my own doorway and watched her stand in hers, 12 feet of hallway between them, and I have never in my life seen someone hold so still while shaking so completely. Mara, he said her name like a key turning. You look tired. I'm worried about you. That's all this has ever been. You used a fake badge to ask my landlord for my building's entry logs, she said. Her voice did not shake, even though everything else about her did. I have that in writing. From him, and from his nephew, who works in actual county records, confirming your badge number doesn't exist. Something moved behind his face. Fast. The look of a man watching a door he thought was locked swing open the wrong way. You're going to twist that into something it isn't, he said, and the warmth had gone out of his voice entirely, which told me more than anything he'd said with it in. I'm not twisting anything, Mara said. I'm reading it back to you. Out loud. In a hallway with a witness. While you're recorded, she held up her phone, screen toward him, light blinking red. You wanted a paper trail, Daniel. You're standing in one. He tried one more angle, the way a man tries a door handle he's already been told is locked, just to be sure. His voice softened back into the version he probably believed was sincere. Mara, sweetheart, I'm not your enemy. Whatever you've convinced these people of, whatever story you've built, I'm the one who knows what actually happened. I'm the one who was there. You can keep recording, keep building your little file, but tomorrow there's a judge, and judges believe paperwork, and I have 2 years of paperwork. You have 2 years of paperwork you wrote, Mara said. I have 16 days of paperwork. That's true. Tomorrow we'll see which kind holds up when someone actually checks it, instead of just trusting the letterhead. I have a sister who believes me, she added, when he didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there recalculating. I have a neighbor who opened a door at midnight instead of asking questions first. You came here to remind me what I'm afraid of. I'd like you to leave knowing what I actually have instead. He left without another word, which was somehow louder than anything he could have said. The hearing happened the next afternoon. I wasn't in the room. Mara went in with a folder thick enough to function as evidence of its own thoroughness, The log, Pete's recorded call, his nephew's written confirmation, the fake badge number cross referenced against the real county directory, 16 days of time-stamped entries and handwriting that got steadier the longer the list got. I spent those 4 hours pacing my own apartment like the hallway might give me information if I walked it enough times. Cass called twice. The first call was just breathing and a question. Have you heard anything? And my answer of no, not yet, sat between us like its own small countdown. The second call came 90 minutes later, and her voice had a different register entirely. He brought a lawyer, Cass said. Last minute. Some guy from a firm that does this kind of thing professionally. Contested wellness petitions. Custody-adjacent stuff. Mara texted me from the hallway outside the courtroom. She says he looked confident walking in. My stomach dropped somewhere I didn't know it could reach. Confident how? Confident like a man who thinks paperwork from the right person beats truth from the wrong one. A pause. I almost drove down there. I didn't, because she asked me not to, because she said she needed to do this part herself, standing on her own evidence instead of behind somebody else's. But I wanted you to know in case. Cass didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I sat with that unfinished sentence for the better part of an hour, replaying 16 days of timestamps in my head like I could will them to be enough from 40 minutes away. Useless and present at the same time, which I was starting to understand was most of what loving someone through a crisis actually felt like. She came back up the stairs 4 hours later and didn't knock on my door. She used the key I'd given her 2 days before, which felt like its own kind of reveal, quieter than the others. Petition dismissed, she said. And they're referring the impersonation thing to an actual prosecutor, which means for once in his life, the paperwork is going to be about him. She sat down on my floor, not against the door this time, against the couch, which felt like the whole story compressed into one piece of furniture. I didn't think paper could fix anything. I thought paper was just what he used against me. Turns out, it cuts both ways once someone bothers to read it. She was quiet for a while. Then, smaller, he's going to find some other angle. Men like him always find some other angle. Maybe, but now there's a file with his name on it that says fraud in an actual courthouse, and that doesn't go away just because he's creative. I sat down next to her, not across from her, which felt like its own small milestone. He spent 2 years building a version of you that only existed in his retelling. Today a judge looked at the receipts instead of the retelling. That's not nothing. That might be the whole thing, actually. It took 6 weeks for the impersonation charge to move through whatever slow machinery these things move through, and Mara called me from the courthouse steps the day it resolved, her voice doing something I hadn't heard it do before. Light, almost giddy. The sound of someone setting down a bag she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten her shoulders could sit lower. Guilty plea, she said. Impersonating a public official. 2 counts. No jail, because of course not, but a fine, a permanent record, and, this is the part I actually wanted, a restraining order that has real teeth now, because it's not built on my word against his anymore. It's built on a judge's own ruling that he lied to a county landlord with a fake badge to track down a woman he had no legal claim to. How do you feel? Light, she said, and laughed at her own word choice. I've been so heavy for so long, I forgot light was a feeling and not just a color. Cass took her out for dinner that night, the 3 of us actually, in a booth too small for the size of what we were celebrating. And at some point Cass raised her glass and said, "Do paperwork," completely straight-faced. And Mara laughed so hard she had to put her water down before she spilled it. And I understood in that exact moment that I was watching someone get her sense of humor back in. Real time, which is a thing I didn't know you could witness until I witnessed it. Somewhere between the appetizers and the check, Cass leaned across the table and said, more serious now, I want you to know I deleted his number. Tonight, before we even ordered. I should have done it 2 years ago. But I did it tonight, and I wanted you to be the one who watched me do it. She showed Mara the screen, the empty space where a contact used to be, like evidence of her own kind submitted into a different kind of record. Mara didn't say anything. She just reached across the table and held her sister's hand for a long moment, the two of them building, in real time, the version of family Daniel had spent 2 years trying to convince them they couldn't have. She was quiet for a while. Then, why did you let a stranger sit on your floor at midnight? Because you knocked like you already expected me to say no, and I didn't want to be one more person who did. She laughed, really laughed, the kind that has a future in it, and said the line I think about more than any other part of that month. I came down for one night so I wouldn't be alone with the fear. I didn't know I was about to stop being alone with anything. It's been 3 months. She still comes downstairs most nights, though now it's for tea she actually drinks and not for a locked door to put her back against. The gray sedan never came back. Pete's nephew, against all odds, became something like a friend of the building. Mara kept the folder, the whole ugly stack of it, in a drawer she calls proof I survived my own life, which she says with a half smile now instead of a flinch. I think about that first knock a lot. How easy it would have been to not open the door. How many people, statistically, don't? So here's what I keep coming back to. The question I can't stop turning over. Have you ever realized, only after the fact, that the person who knocked on your door at their lowest moment was quietly trusting you with the one thing they'd never said out loud to anyone else? And is there someone in your life right now, on the other side of a door, who's waiting for you to be the kind of person who opens it before they have to explain why they knocked? If this one got under your skin, you know what to do. Tell me in the comments who you thought of first.